Today we're talking about the history behind Murdoch Mysteries Season 16 Halloween episode. Disclaimer, there are a lot of clowns in this one, and I'm absolutely terrified of clowns. Toronto in the autumn of 1910 was cold. It was known as the Queen City. And despite all the murderous clowns in this episode, it was known as Toronto the Good. But how good was Toronto then? Judging by how many murders are in this episode, perhaps not so good. We tend to think of Halloween as a fun, lighthearted holiday for children, but it wasn't always the case. In fact, this episode is fairly representative of the times, dark and creepy. Proof? Just look at these postcards sent from Toronto in 1910. Some of them are fairly cute, but most of them, terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Look at this one. Terrifying. Season 16's Halloween episode. I still know what you did last autumn. Let's take a look at some of the history behind the episode. Julia Ogden and Louise Cherry start the episode off on a film set, a scene where a scary-looking clown actually kills the actress. But if you were to watch a film in Toronto at that time, there were only around 10 film theaters. Movies were still quite a new format at the time. But Toronto women in film were already remarkably important. By 1910, Toronto-born and raised actress Mary Pickford was already becoming a global superstar. Pickford was born Gladys Louise Smith at 211 University Avenue, right here, in 1892, now the location of Sick Kids Hospital. Pickford would go on to become the most successful and influential woman in Hollywood history. By 1916, Pickford was receiving a guarantee of over $1 million per film, close to $20 million in 2022 money. She revolutionized how films were produced, co-founded what would become the Academy Awards, and would be as globally recognized as Charlie Chaplin. This theater right here at Spadina and Queen would be renamed the Pickford Theater in 1915. Here are some photos of other cool theaters in Toronto at the time. Now, back to the episode.
Fire cleans the sins.
See this fire plan? Well, what you have to understand is how seriously fire was taken during this era. 6 years prior, in this exact part of the city, Toronto had the Great Fire of 1904. What you're looking at now is the first film footage ever taken of the city. Ever. And right here, the Canadian Cycle and Motor Company, as in CCM, at the time being only 5 years old. Over 100 buildings were lost, causing over $10 million in 1904 damage. But magically, there were no deaths. If you were preparing to fireproof your building, office, or home, you'd reach out to one of these folks, like the Fire Inspection Bureau of Canada.
Don't you have your own tailor? No, I was going to surprise you.
Inspector Bracken Reed asks Murdoch what he's sewing. Well, if he needed help, he could have reached out to one of these folks. Toronto was full of tailors at the time, hence why you look at footage of the era and everyone looks great. Fun fact, the Toronto police spent $17,464 on clothing and equipment that year. Now, Murdoch walks into the dressing room
Sir,
with
I
Constable
hesitate to
Higgins.
state the obvious, but this man murdered someone. Does it really matter how his shoes got dirty?
You could be right, Henry.
But
Maybe
wait,
nothing.
hold the shot. You see right here, a postcard. That postcard, though, is actually this one. The prestigious King Edward Hotel on King Street. Here is an exact version of that card sent to the US in 1908, complete with this stamp of King Edward VII. So, a postcard of the King Edward Hotel with a stamp of King Edward. Very meta. When Murdoch realizes the murders appear to be copycats, he headed to the Draconian Don Jail, which is still partially there, just not as a prison. It opened in 1864 and wouldn't cease being a prison until 2013, actually. The jail was the site of many high-profile hangings, including the last two performed in Canada before the law was changed in 1962. The jail housed many high-profile criminals, including the famous Boyd Gang, Canada's notorious bank-robbing gang in the 1950s. It also briefly was the Cell Block nightclub in Tom Cruise's 1988 film, Cocktail. In 1910, the concept of trick-or-treating likely would not have been happening. As I said before, we now view Halloween as a kids' event, or, an evening of, But in the early part of the 20th century, Halloween was primarily rooted in either adults having parties or pranks. And candy wasn't typically used until the mid-century. If you wanted to get candy in 1910 in Toronto, though, you could find it here, one of these places. But pumpkins, like this one, and this one, and that one. Well, as you can see from the postcards of the era, pumpkins were definitely part of Toronto's Halloween. And clowns? So in the Halloween episode, Murdoch comes out of this exact door, and there are a whole bunch of clowns. And it's terrifying, because I hate clowns. But to be honest, it would have been a costume people wore at the time. Now, one of the amazing things about Murdoch Mysteries is the effort put into all the small historical details in the background. Take the piano in Scott's Diner. Yup, the piano you see in the background was made in Toronto at that same time by the Mozart Company and sold by the Heinzmann & Co. So I'm in Scott's Diner right now. Anyone that watches the show knows that George and Effie are here all the time. One of the cool little things is the menu, the dinner menu. Some of these things sound really good, and a few of them not really my style. Stewed kidneys. I think I might pass on that one. Clear green turtle soup. I don't even know what that is, but there are donuts, so win. How good was Toronto the Good at Halloween that year? Well, let's take a quick look. Actually, pretty darn good. Perhaps the clowns were a bit nicer than we thought. Just kidding. I hate clowns. So the episode was actually fairly representative of the era. Halloween wasn't commercialized yet. It wasn't specifically for kids. It was still a bit creepy. But thankfully, there wasn't actually a murderous clown back then. And hopefully, definitely hopefully, there never will be. Now let me briefly digress. If you like Toronto history, please make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it, and as always, tell all your friends. Okay, I'm a bit worried that I told everyone how much I hate clowns. A bit too much. But I do, I hate them.